Díomh gachtainna, hello everyone, agus fáilte of go Q&A mí na saona, tá mé hain agus Siobhán a seo nach libh chun bhór geisina ragart. So chud is tá tú hain, Siobhán?
Canhacar mag agus tú hain?
Tá mé go dílar fadanis gur míle agat. All right. So, tas na míad leis na geisina mar sin. So, tháinig ceist ansa ó California, agus Tay an Tanmatari. So we have a ceist here from Tay in California. And she says, I am good with reading and learning and spelling, but can't understand much of spoken language. Need help and advice. So I can definitely say we've all been there, Tay. I can absolutely relate to that. I have been learning Spanish and French for years, and I think spoken language in any language is definitely the hardest aspect for sure. Everything you've learned is tested and you're really put on the spot to understand everything and respond in kind as well. So try not be too hard on yourself about that, because it is very difficult. With regard to Irish, there are a good few resources out there for you if you're looking for something that's a little bit slower that you can kind of go over with maybe a text as well. So the main one that comes to mind anyway is a podcast called Nuacht Vowel, which means slow news. And they read, so every episode is about 5 minutes long, and they read news stories of the week or of the day in different dialects. So you can really hear them said slowly, and then if they say a word you don't understand, you could say, right, I'm going to look that up in a dictionary. But you can kind of start to recognize words that run together a bit more, and maybe recognize words that you don't know and might have to look up. So that would be my recommendation.
So I would say that I definitely understand where you are there, Tay, because when I was learning French at school, I had a similar experience. Reading, writing, even speaking was easier than actually understanding the spoken word. So that's I think a very common problem. So I would say listening to a lot of Irish is one way of getting your ear accustomed to the different sounds. And as you mentioned there, Aisling, Nothwall is a brilliant resource. And it's only recently began, as far as I know, so it's great to have that. Great addition. And another great resource is Vifex, and that is clips taken from TG Cahir News. So TG Cahir is the Irish language television station, and with the clips, there's also a PDF now. And in the PDF, there are some exercises, but on the very last page, there's the transcript of the audio in the video clip. So that way you can follow what the person's saying. So that's really good. That's really good as well for that. And I would say Rusnaroon as well, because Rusnaroon has loads of different dialects, and you can watch it on the TG Cahir player with Irish subtitles. So that way you can, if you don't get what they're saying, at least you can read it in Irish and you'll know what they're saying then. So it's very good for that. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else then? Oh yes, there are some others as well. There's actually quite a lot of ways. If news, or of course with Rusnaroon, it's more normal conversation, so that's very good. But also we've got some stories such as Fábhail Scéalta de Láney. So that's a YouTube channel, and it has some fairy tales there, and it's being read aloud in different dialects. And there you could just read along or just listen. And so that's very good. And Learning Ale, an organisation, an Irish language organisation, has more than 100 stories for children, Scéalta de Fáiste, on YouTube. And so they're ordinary children's books being read aloud, and the camera is situated so that you can actually read the book as it's being read. So that's very good. It's very good. So yeah, I think that's all that I can think of off the top of my head, but I'll post the links to all these resources on the blog post right after we finish this live stream. So I guess we'll move on to our second question. This one is from Fraser in Edinburgh, and his question is, Is it ever the case that you find you really cannot understand another's Irish? I'm thinking it might be most likely when conversing with someone with a strong regional dialect. As a second part to that question, do you find that older generations speak differently from younger generations? In Dundee, where I am from, older folk often use a strong dialect and Scots words which are largely not common now. Thanks. So, Fraser. So that's a very good question there. And how would you respond to that, Aisling?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, actually. And it's definitely the case in most languages. I mean, even if you look at older generations speaking English, they might use phrases or words that you might not use too much. So if you're learning a language, something like that can seem very daunting, but I think it's normal in every language. So, you know, it's definitely just a kind of shift in generational preferences for other languages, or for other phrases or words. And I definitely find the same with Irish. If I'm speaking to someone who's a bit older than me, I might struggle to understand everything. And that's normal enough. But it's also really interesting because they might have a much richer way of saying things that you might not be aware of, and they might tell you, and it's a great learning opportunity, actually, to speak to someone who's older or from another generation, because they can tell you very interesting ways or quirky ways to say different things. So if you're speaking about Irish in particular, there are a series of books called An Tang of Yo, and they speak about different dialectal kind of phrases and language. So they have, I think there's 3 books. There's one for Ulster, one for West Kerry, and one for Connemara. I'm not sure if there's any for Mayo or for Meath or for Washford. I don't think there are, or the other Gaeilge in the country, but there are 3 of those books anyway. And there's a lot of words and phrases in there that might not be too common in speech today, but definitely would be common in the older generation's Irish. So they're great just to kind of have as a reference if you're trying to expose yourself to different dialects or different kind of words. Even the previous question there, Tate, there's an Ulster book, and I'm actually looking to get that book for myself just to learn some of the Ulster words and Ulster phrases, because I'm not very familiar with them. So I think it's definitely common, and if you can try and look at it as a learning opportunity more than kind of a, oh God, I can't understand what they're saying, and think, oh, they might actually have a very cool way to say something that I say very basically or simply. So that would be my take on it anyway.
Oh yeah, I agree with you totally there, Aisling. That's a very good way of going about it, and again, it's a case of exposing yourself to these dialects, and if you find one dialect particularly tricky, listen to it more, read more in that dialect, and again, similar to the previous question, it's very important to listen to different dialects, and you can do that by listening to Radio na Gaeilge, especially the news. It's in 3 different dialects at the very least, and the 3 main dialects, so it's handy. You can kind of follow which dialect you're listening to, but also all the different shows. There are different shows that often focus on one particular dialect or one particular area. And also, as I mentioned before, us around, that is different dialects as well. So that's a handy one. But there are also different books and different dialects. So what you can do is you can contact one of the online bookstores. There's such as, let's say, you could have litríocht.com, for example. I'm sure if you email them looking for books in one particular dialect, they can help. And even a quick Google search would probably bring up some as well. But that's part of it. When it comes to the different dialects, then I would say that different generations of Irish speakers tend to speak different types of Irish, similar to other languages, really, in English as well. Every dialect kind of, every generation, I should say, in a sense, has its own dialect. And one might use idioms, for example, that the other wouldn't understand at all, or at least wouldn't be that familiar with. We can think about that in any language. I think just the older generation mightn't understand some of the words or phrases the younger generation uses, and vice versa. And it's the same really in Irish. The older generation would often has many words and phrases connected to, let's say, agriculture or older technology that we wouldn't really use as much today. And even idioms that would have been that would have made a lot of sense in most people's lives before, they don't make as much sense today, and so can kind of drop out of use. And there are many newer phrases that people pick up from using the internet, and especially if the person's reading a good bit, it can affect their Irish as well. And it might kind of, if they grew up, let's say, with a stronger dialect, that dialect could be a bit watered down in a sense, because they might be more exposed to other dialects and pick up phrases from other dialects and stuff like that, and start using words that they wouldn't have used as a child, or their parents wouldn't use, because they read them in books and stuff, as would happen, I would say, to a speaker of any other language. So it's similar in that sense in Irish. And of course there are some influences of the English language as well, and that can influence Irish in different ways over the generations. So that's another part of it as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes people imagine Irish, or the dialects of Irish in the Gaeltacht, as these kind of walled in areas, you know, and everything is very specific to that place. But that's a very good point about kind of, if you're from Cork and you go to college in Dublin, for example, or go to work in Dublin, you could pick up slang there in English, and people wouldn't say, oh, is that a very specific to a Cork dialect or whatever, you know. So it's the same with Irish. It definitely changes and takes on different forms based on the speaker's own experience, you know. So that's definitely something to take into it as well. But it's a really interesting question. I've never been asked something like that before, so it's very nice to chat about it.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right, so will we go on to the next one? Is from Daniel, and he's in the UK. He's a Grow member of ours. And he says, Dave, can you share any words which don't have exact English translations? German, for instance, has Weltschmerz, I think I'm saying that right, to mean a certain kind of world weariness, and French has dépaysement to mean something like the feeling of being in unfamiliar surroundings. Does Irish have any words like this which are not easily translatable into English? All right, so Daniel, it's a lovely question. And there definitely are, there's loads of words, there's absolutely loads. So when I read that question first, the main one I thought of was there's lots of nouns in Irish to describe people. So in something in English would be kind of a phrase, is a word in Irish. And there's a lovely one, so moog. I think I've brought that up before in the Q&A, but it means kind of like a soft, lazy person, which it's hard to even know what that is really, but in Irish it just has one word, so it obviously meant something very specific at a point in time. And there's ointeach, which is like the female Amadan, a bit of an Egypt. There's meowtor, slimador, plubbera. Plubbera is one of my favorites. It's kind of like a chubby child. I think that's very specific to the Ring Gaeltacht in Ryan in Waterford. So there's lots of them, which I think they're very, very rich, and they're kind of very expressive in a way that other languages don't have. There's no curse words in Irish, but there are all of these very rich words to describe people. There's another phrase then which I really love, which is tocht machri, which kind of means, if you're about to cry, you might have kind of a catch in your throat, like your voice gets caught. And the same can be said for your heart in Irish. So there's something catching your heart. So there's kind of an emotional block in your heart, which is lovely. There's a book out at the moment called 32 Words for a Field. And that same author, his name is Manchan Mangan, he's done a lot of programs at TGCAR as well. And he's all into the kind of the etymology of words and things like that. And there's an Irish Times article that he wrote about 2 years ago. Well, I'll definitely add it to the blog as well. But he speaks about the kind of almost like the spiritual element to Irish words. And I know Daniel is into philosophy, so he might like that aspect of it. But a kind of the folklore and philosophical side of Irish words that we probably don't hear about a lot. So there's loads of them. Another one then kind of similar to dépaysement is aduantas. And aduina in Irish is kind of like strangeness or unfamiliarity. So then aduantas is that feeling you have if you're anxious somewhere that you don't really know the surroundings, or you don't know where you are. And then another one that I really like, the last one I'll mention, is bohantíocht, which is the word for the tradition of going from house to house telling stories in the winter. So it's a very specific word for a kind of an idea, and it paints a gorgeous image of, I don't know, I just imagine people wandering house to house in the dark in winter and sharing stories and songs and music. So there are plenty. That's just a handful of the ones that came to my head when I read your question, but there are many. So what would be the ones you'd share, Siobhán?
So the ones I have, one in particular that kind of annoys me in a sense, because I often use it in English and sometimes people don't understand it and I can't describe it in English, and that's scrawl. So this is simply a word that it's nothing. It's not really. It doesn't have any deep meaning really, like many of the words you had there, Aisling. But this is simply. It's the definition would be a sod of the surface of a field, like taken from the surface of a field. So it includes the grass and its roots and the soil that's attached to the roots, and it can often be. It could often be a square shape, and it's quite difficult to even express what it is unless you know what it is. So this spelling here, scraw, the one SCRAW, this is you can find this in some English dictionaries actually, because there's no particular word in English. Sod is the nearest word, but it's not precise enough because a sod can be different things, can take a different shape. So that's the thing. So that's a word, scraw, and many people actually use that in English as well, because there's just no specific word. Another word that's often used in English in Ireland, and even more commonly, and that's plámás. And plámás is a type of flattery that's done to curry favour with the recipient of the flattery. I guess the nearest term, or it's not really, I suppose, a set term in English, but the nearest translation in English would be ingratiating flattery. I guess that's the easiest way to translate it in English, or the closest translation. And so that's one. So you often hear people saying plámás or plámásing, or he's a plámás, or so it can be changed a bit in English. So you can so plámás is the word. So it's flattery, but there's more to it. It's flattery with a purpose, let's say. Mm-hmm. And another one then. I just give one more now, but there are just so many, and that's bug-on. Bug-on is a shellless egg. So who knew they needed a word for a shellless egg? So bug-on, but it can take other meanings as well. It can be like a little belly, or like something that's soft, basically, because bug means soft. So it's a soft thing, but it's like its precise definition could be a shellless egg. So I always thought that was a nice one. Kind of has a nice sound to it as well. So yeah. So there's even more, but we'll add those words to the blog as well, so you can look over them.
I've never heard of the word bug-on. It's lovely. It's kind of like samóg in a way. It gives me that same kind of imagery.
Yeah, it can have that meaning as well. It can.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there's a good few watching. Will we have a look at some of the questions here and see?
Great. Oh, I see one there about an Caighdeán Ofigiúil. I think that's a great question. Mm-hmm. So I would say, yes, as far as accents are concerned, why not use Caighdeán Ofigiúil? So the simple, I would say, answer to that is an Caighdeán Ofigiúil isn't a spoken standard. It's strictly speaking only for official government documents. Now it has come into use outside of that, but that's really it. So it's really just a written standard. It's not like received pronunciation in English. So do you have any thoughts on that there, Aisling?
Yeah, that's kind of it, really, isn't it? It was created specifically for state use, for state kind of translation and state documents and things like that. And it's made its way into teaching a lot as well, because it makes it kind of easier if there's one word for something, as opposed to saying, oh, well, they say this here and they say this here, and there's this rule in Ulster, but then that doesn't apply anywhere else. So I think the Caighdeán Ofigiúil makes teaching and generalizing the language a little bit easier, which is kind of hilarious, really, because for such a small country and for a minority language, really, there's so much variation in the dialect. So I think an Caighdeán Ofigiúil just allows people to kind of generalize it a little bit more, to make it easier to learn, to teach, and for official documents as well. So I think there was actually I think the Caighdeán Ofigiúil was updated again recently, so there could be some additions to it or some amendments to it.
That's the thing, it has been amended a few times, and funnily enough, it's not, it actually allows for different dialects, ironically. Like it allows for, if my memory serves me right now, in the most recent version, it allows for the difference in certain parts of in certain parts of grammar in the Ulster dialect, in comparison to the rest of the dialect. So there is actually an allowance there for dialect, so it's not really that much of a standard at all when you think of it. It isn't just it isn't that strict in a way.
Yeah, I think they allow for example, like Aaron Mord, Aaron Vord, that kind of way. They allow that variation, and they allow some verbs, I think, that might have different forms as well. So it's yeah, I think they're trying to please everyone with it, but I don't know if they're helping at all. Okay, so we have another one here from Isbrahim Gaeilge, and he says, in Connacht Irish and in the Ulster dialect, is the present tense and so A-N-N, E-A-N-N endings spelt as, oh yes, okay. So do you want to start with this one, Siobhán?
All right, so I would say that one, so this is, you do, it's slightly, I think you might be, which would this be referring to now? So this could be, well, so I don't think this you do find this ending is in the past tense. For example, the chorus, but that'd be more Munster, I would say. Or else you're thinking of vice instead of a vi, and that would be in the future. So I think it depends. There's nothing coming to mind now that refer in the present tense.
So I think this one can be the future tense in Connemara. So I know in the Shanukal an Artin will the Cree is on a Horus the Cussahu, so it's on a Horig, so that's where they will take you. But then there's the Furim Haita as well, which is it's very common in Munster for Huiris, and that would be in the past tense for Huirme, where the subject kind of gets mixed in with the verb. But this AS or EAS at the end in Connacht is for the future tense. And I don't, yeah, I don't think it replaces the subject like the Furim Haita would. So Huirme becomes Huiris in the Furim Haita, but then Horhis the Cussahu, it doesn't change. It doesn't take the subject at all. I think that's my understanding of it anyway.
That's true. Yeah, vice may. That's it. You wouldn't. It doesn't remove the pronoun, so it's different in that sense. So that's more the future tense. And that is a thing, though. That is a thing that you won't find too much in grammar books or in textbooks. It's kind of on the fringes a bit. So that is something, and there is it's like a vice is slightly different from a vi, but it's often used kind of as a synonym, but still it's there is a slight difference, but it's kind of obsolete in a sense. So some of these, they're a bit archaic, but they might still be used, but you rarely find them referenced to in a grammar book or anything. So that might be a reason why you'll find this a bit difficult to find that. But I will add a note about that in the blog that's linked in the description box.
Okay, let me see if there are any more now.
See.
Oh yes, sorry, Aaron Mord means on the table. I should have specifically said that as Bearla, but it means on the table. So there's just a different rule sometimes for different dialects with it. Okay.
That's it. So I guess those are all the questions for tonight that I see here anyway. So yeah, so I guess we'll call it a night then. And before we go, I'll just mention that on Pubble we have a section for Grow members, and it allows for people to interact with other Irish learners and also with ourselves, and so you have a live weekly video call as well as live written chats, and also there are videos there, and we answer everyone's questions and stuff like that, so it's quite interactive. So I'll just get a link up for that. So we have that, of course, on the Bitesize website, so that's our email there, but of course you can simply go to bitesize.irish to our website, and you can try out our taster at that link, and it's linked in the description box. We also have a free ebook and an email course, and also a singing course, and you can also access that in the description box. So yeah, anything more there before we go?
I think the one thing is, if you do want to submit questions in advance, you get the kind of first update about the Q&As in the newsletter. Again, you can email us on the website if you'd like to get signed up to that, or just Google Bitesize newsletter, and you can sign up there as well. Just so you know about a week or two in advance that the Q&A is happening if you want to submit a question, and we'll put all our research into it and have it all ready to answer for you. So that's a nice way to be kind of up to date with what's going on with us anyway. That's it.
Okay. So we're looking forward to your questions next month.
All right. Gur míle maith go gachtainna. Slán.
Slán go fóill. Slán.